Our subject is a very important one and a very practical one. The liberating power of affirmation. We don't realize, but we are affirming all the time. Maybe not also in speech, but particularly in thought. And we have to become aware of what we are doing, and we have to make certain changes in order to change certain patterns which may not be so good. It's written in one of the old writings of India, the mind is the cause of your bondage, and the mind is the cause of your liberation. So that's very interesting. Actually, we have two minds. One is the lower mind, sensory mind, which is supporting the ego, body-identified ego, the limited self. And the other one is the higher mind, which is called buddhi in Sanskrit, which works with the soul. And most people in this world, unfortunately, are working through the lower mind, because the proof of this is that so very, very few people are asking the most basic question: what is the purpose of life? So our consciousness is really made up of what is mind. In this context, it is really consisting of the thinking principle, and it is also the feeling, and it is also state of consciousness. I want to give a scripture reading first. St. Luke, the 6th chapter. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good. And an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. Of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh. And Master wrote, when Jesus said, of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh, he meant that speech is the index to the contents of the heart. And that is not just the physical heart, the feeling. It's the whole inner self. The speech of an individual carries within itself the sound vibrations, the subtler vibrations of the inner tendencies. So that goes right back into the inner self, the inner core. And that means state of consciousness, and that depends on where we are in spiritual evolution. So when we are talking, all kinds of things are going out. First of all, the physical vibrations of the vocal cords. With that goes the state of mind, feeling, and the magnetism, magnetic force, magnetic vibrations that we are. That is the state of evolution. For instance, it says in the Bible that Jesus spoke like no other man. So it is not only the words which went out, but the spiritual force behind it that he had. And same thing with Master. When our Guru talked, it was not just the voice that came out, but an incredible spiritual power, very subtle spiritual force that went out. And now, in comparison, when you see those famous rock stars, what they are sending out, not only their voice, but their vibrations of their consciousness, that's an entirely different stuff that is going out, isn't it? There was a great opera star, Madame Gallicucci. She was a disciple of Master, and found the teaching and started to meditate. And then afterwards, she said, she was singing differently. she said, I concentrated at the Christ center, and I visualized that my voice went out from here, from a Christ center. In other words, she was spiritualizing what she was sending out. And so it was not only the beautiful voice that she had, but that attempt to spiritualize what she was singing. And I think, personally, it was not just a beautiful voice, but that intention of giving the people something more. That's what made her the great star. Then we have from the Bhagavad Gita, first verse, first chapter. Now those of you who have the Gita, you know that the Master wrote page after page after page about this first verse. I give you just a tiny little bit. And Dhritarashtra spoke on the holy plain of Kurukshetra, gathered together eager for battle. My children, the Kurus and the Pandus, what did they, O Sanjaya? The Master wrote, in writing the Bhagavad Gita, the sage Vyasa cleverly interwove historical and psychological truths. He took a real battle that once took place on the field of Kurukshetra, and the names of a few warriors, and he interwove with them psychological names and characters, and thus built out the description of the war between man's crooked mental tendencies. The Kurus, that's the bad guys, and his good discriminative tendencies, that's the Pandus, that's the good guys. Now there it is. The first stanza tells us a fundamental truth, that life is a series of battles. Have you ever noticed that? Battles, all the way through. Battles between spirit and matter, that is the universal thing. Soul and body, now it comes to us. Life and death, knowledge and ignorance, health and disease, changelessness and transitoriness, self-control and temptations, discrimination, that's the higher mind, and the blind sensory mind, that's the lower mind. That all that stuff is going on. And most people are not aware of that at all. It just happens. They're in the midst of it, And we learn more and more gradually that this stuff is going on. These battles are going on at all levels, in every phase of our life, every aspect of our life. And if we become aware, through discrimination, through introspection, become aware of our own tendencies, of our own habit patterns, gradually we can then make changes. And that is where affirmation comes in. Now, I want to give you a few points. One of them is, and this is in the book, The Divine Romance, by Paramahansa Yogananda, that is the mind repository of infinite power. And there he says the mind of God created the stars and all the worlds. Mind is the supreme factor that is working throughout creation. That's God's mind. If you think of how big that creation is, billions of galaxies, it's a powerful mind that created all that, isn't it? Now, our little minds are part of the omnipotent mind of God. And that's what we are not thinking about. Our little minds are a part of that omnipotent mind of God. Beneath the wave of our consciousness is the infinite ocean of His consciousness. And then he says it is because the wave meaning us, forgets it is part of the ocean, that it has become isolated from the oceanic power. And as a result, our minds have become weakened by our trials and material limitations and identification with the mortal body and all that sort of thing. And so he says the mind has stopped its work. You will be surprised how much it can do if you cast off the limitations you have put on it. This is an incredible thought if you really think about it, that we are not thinking our own little thoughts. We are connected with the ocean. So you have to eventually work towards that, and eventually you will become one with that infinite power. And that is really what a master is all about. He has connected his consciousness with the infinite consciousness of God. You know, it's a good thing that we don't have that power, because first we have to get control of ourselves and our emotions and everything. When you see all the time, every day practically it happens, and somebody is going crazy and killing people and all that sort of thing. Now, can you imagine if such a person had that power? He could, with one thought, he could destroy the whole world. So we have to learn to work on ourselves to first master our emotions, purify our consciousness, and so on. And then gradually build through meditation, connecting ourselves with that infinite power of God. And the great masters, they had that. You know, for instance, when you read in the Bible, Jesus being beat up and crucified and all that sort of thing, he didn't do anything, right? That's mastery. It was not, not just what he did and performing miracles and all that sort of thing, but that was mastery, because he didn't use his powers. With one thought, he could have destroyed those people. So, we have to work first on using that mind power that we have in a constructive way, in a positive way, in order to be successful in our outer life and in our spiritual life. And so the Master, this is in the same talk, he said, success doesn't come from outside. It is in your brain. And usually we think in terms of success comes through outer conditions, outer circumstances, and outer good luck, and what people do, and all that sort of thing. It's not that. It's inside. The outer conditions and outer circumstances and the people that we come in contact with and all that sort of thing is the result of our thoughts. So it's there. That's the source. And then he says, as soon as you think a right thought, work it. You must have courage and perseverance and think, I am going to see my idea through. These are all keys that we should remember. And then he says, think and act. Think and act. That is how to develop your mind power. In other words, you may have a good thought, a good idea, and then you throw it away, maybe. But he says, no. You think and act, meaning you put the energy behind it, you make the effort, and you keep that thought going until that idea materializes, manifests, whether it is in outer life, outer success, or spiritually. It's very often that a person thinks, well, maybe I'm not good enough, I'm not ready yet for seeking God and all that sort of thing. That is what we have to watch, because we have been brought to these teachings now because of our good actions and our good thoughts in the past, right? So we are ready. Even sometimes we think, I'm not ready yet for this. But we are. And that is why he says you have to have courage, positive thinking, positive thought, and perseverance. Think and act. Make the effort until you have what you want to do. And then he said, thought works. It is a marvelous force. Believe in the power of thought, which comes from God. And use all the strength of your heart and your will to try to materialize that thought. Remember, God is with you. In other words, there's a connection there. The wave is not separate from the ocean, isn't it? It's part of the ocean. You are exercising His power, which you have borrowed from Him. And when you do that, He will be nearer to you to help you. I mean, He's always here, always trying to help us. But if we are making the connection through thinking, I am connected with the ocean, God is right here, I'm part of God, then we know He is near. So it's a very interesting thing. You know, I told you that story of that boy who was about 8 years old and he was in a fire and he was burned so badly, especially the lower part, and the doctor said, you will never be able to walk again, sorry. And the boy didn't accept that. He said, I am going to walk again. And later on, when he was grown up, he broke the world record in running a mile. So, mind over matter. Then another thought, and this is very important now. Sri Yukteswar said, and you read this in the autobiography of a yogi, thoughts are universally and not individually rooted. Again, we are connected. We are not just separated as little beings, living our own little lives, thinking our own little thoughts. No way. Thoughts are universally rooted, not individually. There's an interesting passage in the Bible, in the Old Testament, Isaiah, where God speaks through him. I am the Lord, there is no other God beside me. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So, in order to have this complex show of creation going on, He created first in thought, and then gradually those thoughts became materialized. And we see it in the physical. All the various things you see, and all the craziness that you see, good and evil. He created that. Because you cannot have a creation if it's just one. There's duality, always. That's the battle which I have been reading about. So this is always going on, and you can boil it down in the Hindu scriptures. It talks about the three gunas, that is the three basic forces in creation, namely the principle of creation, the principle of preservation, and the principle of destruction. Now, let's say you're thinking a bad thought. Once in a while that happens, right? So, you are not responsible for that thought because you did not create that thought. God created it. You know what I said here from Isaiah? I create evil. You're not responsible. He created that. But you're responsible if you keep on thinking that bad thought. That's where the hook is. That's where the battle is, you know? The bad guys and the good guys, they are working inside. And so we have to watch that. Now, Master said, whatever you give out will come back to you. Now you can refer this to the law of karma, cause and effect. But it's really more than that. Whatever you think, you are not thinking just that one little thought that you are thinking. With that thought, you are tuning in to the universal strata of that thought vibration throughout creation that God created. It's like a radio. You turn on the radio and you have the choice in the radio waves, you have all those different vibrations. And so it is with God in His creation. He created good and evil, right? Everything is there in thought. Spheres of thought vibrations. And according to our thinking, with every thought, we are in attunement, we are connected with one of those universal thought vibrations. And that is what he means by we are connected. We are the wave connected with the ocean. And so, now comes discrimination and introspection. And he says, change your thoughts if you would change your circumstances. Since you alone are responsible for what goes on in your mind, only you can change your thoughts. And you will want to change them when you realize that each thought creates according to its nature. Remember that the law works at all times, and that your words and actions are continually demonstrating the kind of thoughts you habitually entertain. It's an interesting subject, isn't it? In our normal waking consciousness, we are constantly thinking, right? And according to our thoughts, we are hooked up, we are attuned to, we are connected with the universal strata of thoughts that God created. And so obviously we have to learn to think positive thoughts. And then we are in connection with not only our own little thoughts, but with the universal structure of that particular thought vibration. And then he says, not only individual, but world calamities are occasioned by the sum total of wrong human thoughts. Thoughts are like words, in that they send out vibrations, good or bad, according to the caliber of thought. And every event in nature is the outcome of the thoughts of creation, meaning human beings. We are all indissolubly linked together and bound up in a common fate. That's where mass karma comes in. Our thoughts not only affect our own lives, but help to bind or to liberate the world at large. So if we are making an effort, spiritual effort, we are contributing to the world at large. It's a deep subject, isn't it? Another point, very important, concentration. Concentration. We have too many distractions in this country, not enough mental discipline. TV, think of it, all that stuff that comes in, into our minds, and they are recorded in our subconscious. It's all there. You remember many years ago when you watched TV? All the rubbish that came out of that box, including commercials and everything. Incredible. Now, think about the strata, universal stratas of thought vibrations that God created. And if you watch all that stuff, where are you? There's no power in the mind. It completely destroys. It's chaos. There was this story of this woman in India who was meditating, and she saw a vision of Krishna as a little boy. And she said, "Why don't you come more often?" And he said, "I am here all the time. But your mind is all over the place usually, and then that's why you can't see me." Now, I want to show you something very interesting. In research, the basic discovery was our thoughts create our moods, the way we feel. Therefore, if you think right, you will feel right. It's not the other way around. Please understand, this is average. This is what usually happens if a person is okay. There are cases where a person has depressions and so on, which need professional counseling and perhaps medication. I'm not talking about that now. I'm talking just the average person, and then also, hormonal differences and so on. That, of course, can be an influence. But generally speaking, it is our thoughts influence our moods. And that is very interesting to me, because in the beginning of life, when a baby is born, there is feeling. There's no thinking principle at all. The mind is not, the reasoning is not developed at all. So it is feeling which is all powerful. And then later on, as the child grows up, then gradually comes this other principle, because then the thinking principle comes in, is being developed. And then our thoughts govern our moods. And so it is, you feel the way you do right now because of the thoughts that you have at this moment. And so that, of course, we can change through affirmations. And I told you, when I was in lecture some years ago, and sometimes people came and all beat up from, the battle of life and so on. And I said, okay, now you go and walk around the lake, slowly, deep breathing, and you're affirming, I'm a child of God, God loves me, everything is fine. And I said, you don't think any other thoughts, you think that. And so they did, walked around the lake once or twice, and then they thought I had performed a miracle. It was the miracle of affirmation, positive affirmation, replacing old patterns, negative patterns of thinking, into positive patterns. And they walked around, they could conquer the world, It's a very simple principle, thought. God created this whole universe through thought. We are connected with that force. And if we are using that rightly, we have it. Everything we want. Now, for instance, a person makes a mistake and then says, I'm a failure, I'm no good. That's a lot of baloney, isn't it? The right thing is, I made a mistake. So what? Everybody makes mistakes. This is part of our learning process. And so you just say, sure, made a mistake. I learn from that. Next time I do better. There's an interesting story. There was in the IBM company, there was a young executive who made a mistake, made a wrong decision, which cost the company several $1 million. And that executive was called in the office of the founder of IBM. And he went there and he said, I suppose you want me to turn in my resignation. And the boss said, you can't be serious. We just invested several $1 million to educate you. Now, I mean, not every boss thinks that way, has that kind of attitude. But God has that attitude. And many times I have seen people just can't believe that. Because they made mistakes, maybe sometimes serious mistakes, and they think, now God hates me. It's not true. Because He created this crazy show, right? He created good and evil. And He put us here for some interesting reason, which we do not quite understand. It's a show, and it's at the same time a school and all that sort of thing. And obviously he knows we're going to make mistakes. Because in the beginning of life, he doesn't give us divine realization, he gives us delusion. And so, you make a mistake, you say, okay, I made a mistake. But I'm still a child of God. And he doesn't hate me. He doesn't hate me because there was a saint in the 14th century, Juliana of Norwich in England. She said, God cannot be angry. God cannot be angry. Anger is a perversion, and you find this in people, but not in God. If it says in the Bible God is angry, all that sort of thing, that has nothing to do with God. That was a very cruel age when that was taught, and it is a reference to the law of karma. Whatever we do comes back to us. That's the law. But God cannot be angry. And she said, if God could be angry even a tiny little bit, he would wipe you out of existence. I mean, you're still here, right? So, he cannot be angry. God is love. And in the Hindu scriptures and in the Bible it says, God is love. That's unconditional. He loves. All right. So, now you have to watch, for instance, what a teacher says to a child or a parent says to a child. This is a letter to Ann Landers by a woman who wrote, growing up, I always felt like a dummy. I dropped out of high school and went back a few years later to get my GED. I then married and raised some children, and although I rated high on all the IQ tests I took for employment, I still felt stupid and had no confidence in myself. And my older sister, Stella, graduated from high school and put herself through some years of college, and for several years she worked as a government court reporter in Washington, D.C., and was promoted to work in Germany and Japan, and I always admired her for making such an interesting life for herself. And recently, Stella told me something that I must have stored away in my subconscious. She said, our mother used to tell everybody that I was the pretty girl and Stella was the smart one. And Stella said she always felt unattractive, although she was actually very pretty. That mother told everybody, and those girls, they heard that, of course, many times. The one is pretty, the other one is smart. So they took it this way. The other one said, I'm not beautiful. The other one said, I'm stupid. They carried that through the whole life, those thoughts. It's very interesting, isn't it? So we have to watch, and I have seen this again and again, of many people. They carry a thought, maybe from a parent, all the way through life. That's an affirmation. These affirmations are planted. And we have to watch that we are not giving in to that sort of thing. So, I want to read just a little bit in closing from the Scientific Healing Affirmations. Choose your affirmation and repeat it, first loudly, then softly, until your voice becomes a whisper, and then gradually affirm it mentally only, without moving your tongue, until you feel that you have attained deep, unbroken concentration. Concentration on a positive affirmation. Not unconsciousness, but a profound continuity of uninterrupted thought. And if you continue with your mental affirmation and go still deeper, you will feel a sense of increasing peace. And during the state of deep concentration, your affirmation will merge with the subconscious stream to come back later reinforced with power to influence your conscious mind through the law of habit. This is how we are replacing wrong thinking patterns through affirmation, conscious affirmation. And then he said, during the time that you experience ever-increasing peace, your affirmation goes deeper into the superconscious realm to return later laden with unlimited power to influence your conscious mind and also to fulfill your desires. Doubt not, and you shall witness the miracle of this scientific faith, scientific truth. It's a miracle of affirmation. It is that power again. Mind is the cause of our bondage and our limitations. And mind, positive affirmation, is the cause for our liberation. All right. God bless you all.